Hello and welcome to Roundtable. In the midst of a terribly dry summer that has set heat records across Europe, the continent's rivers are rapidly shrinking. Water levels on Germany's Rhine River are dangerously close to being too shallow for transport, putting trade at risk and exacerbating the economic crisis. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Well, COVID-19 and Russia's conflict in Ukraine have dramatically worsened this food crisis. And then there's the weather. In France, Greece, Spain and Portugal, temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius brought with them wildfires that forced tens of thousands to leave their homes. Spain and Portugal have reported at least 1,169 heat-related deaths. In the UK, a record 40 degrees Celsius plus brought travel chaos and destroyed some crops. The Rhine, a pillar of the German, Dutch and Swiss economies for centuries, is becoming impassable, and that's making it difficult to ship much-needed coal and gasoline, worsening Europe's already fragile economies and energy crises. Well, I'm able to say hello, first of all, in the studio to Anna Locke, who's Senior Research Associate at the Overseas Development Institute. Then we head to Reading, to the west of London, and we see Samantha Burgess, Deputy Director at the Copernicus Climate Change Service, while in London, Corrado Macchiarelli, Research Manager for Global Macroeconomics at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, which means, Corrado, you know how bad it is and you're going to tell us. Is it that bad right now?
Well, thanks. Obviously, across Europe, transport is one of the elements of river-based commerce that has been ended by climate change. And while disruptions to waterways will be a challenge at the best of times, the region is already on the brink of a recession as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has fueled very high increase in prices by squeezing food and energy supplies as well as households' income. So this adds to the urgency of the European Union to effort to make not only inland shipping more resilient, but altogether to search for autonomy when it comes to energy supply. So I think it's just the drought is just happening at a very bad time for the European economy.
I suppose it would never be a very good time for it to happen, but what you're saying is there's a confluence of different factors. And I want to ask you, you talk about sort of water-based transport within a country, and we have a system of canals in the United Kingdom. They're not used that much now. Perhaps the Thames is used to get big goods in and out of the capital city. But the real problem seems to me that we waste so much water in this country, reading about what the water companies are not doing to make things right. Is it the same right the way across Europe, or are we ridiculously inefficient by comparison here?
Well, of course, it's not only Germany, and the picture is quite bleak for all Europe's rivers. So in France, some parts of the Loire have been dried up almost completely. Some canals have been closed. In the UK, the source of the Thames has moved 5 miles downriver for the first time in history. And of course, there is the Danube in Eastern Europe. So, and that is a prime destination for tourism and is affecting countries such as Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria. So overall, I think we can do something to mitigate the effect of these, but we're never going to catch up with climate change, really.
Okay, climate change is something I know that all three of you really want to talk about. Why don't we take a look at a map of the Rhine, Samantha, before I come to you, because Corrado's been talking about how influential it is. It goes Switzerland, through Germany, into the Netherlands, and you can see a particularly important point on this map called Kaub. And the water level there, I was reading this about 3 weeks ago, had gone down to 49 centimetres, which made it almost economically impossible to get transport past there. Now it's gone down to round about 30 centimetres. What is happening at choke points like this, Samantha? I mean, are goods getting through at all?
Not really is the answer. So the climate conditions that we're facing at the moment are exacerbated by a combination of heat waves and much less precipitation than we would normally have. So not only has the last month been much drier than average over much of Europe, but also the past close to a year has been much drier than average. So this means that recharge rates into river basins, such as the ones you've described, aren't happening. And it also means that the soil is very dry. So there's very low soil moisture, which is impacting agriculture as well. And because the ground is drier, it's also much harder. So this means when we do eventually get rain, instead of soaking into the ground and recharging those rivers, it's actually going to run off as if it was running on concrete instead of soil. And this can lead to flash flooding events.
Let's take a look at that map again, because you've got the coal-fired power plants, steel makers, heavy industry up in the Ruhr Valley, either side of the Rhine, around Cologne and Duisburg. But the interesting thing for me is, regarding the energy crisis, Germany has decided very recently to start firing up its coal-powered. Let's bring that map up again and look at the industrialized area of Germany, around Cologne, Duisburg. That's the Ruhr Valley. And Germany's just started opening up its coal-fired power stations once again. And I'm interested because if you haven't got water to operate the cooling plants as well, you have another issue there. So what happens around the big industry that we see? If you can't run the power stations, people don't get their power. If you can't cool the reactors, etc., whatever, you've got real problems. You need water vitally here.
Yes, water is critical for all aspects of our society, and events like this are really showing us what risks we're facing as a society in Europe and what resilience our infrastructure has as well. So if we look at water, for example, we need it for transport, we need it for energy usage, we need it for agriculture, we need it to live. And if we're reliant on these regions that and catchments that are incredibly low, and we can't rely on energy infrastructure, then we're going to face events like this more frequently, and they may be more intense in the future as well with a warming world.
I'm going to come to you in just a second, Anna. Apologies for leaving you till last, but you're in the studio. And I did explain to you that we've got clips from two British farmers that we're going to play in, one of whom is a livestock farmer, the other one is an arable farmer. Let us hear, first of all, from Ian Pullen and your thoughts when we've got his point of view.
That's all we've got. Bit of clover. There is some green in the grass and some minute growth. But generally, the only thing that is growing is, apart from that unusual patch there, which there's got to be something stale about that, something yucky. The only thing that's growing is thistles. So these guys are just coming into flower, so that one's actually going to seed. Green and pleasant land, except that it's brown. A week of decent rain and warmth, it'll recover. And then another couple of weeks it'll grow. Yeah, but it's not good. So
his point is, yes, everybody's suffering that, but he has no answer. And you, as somebody who plans for the economics of agriculture, do you have something to help him today rather than 10 years down the line?
Well, I think nothing today, from today to tomorrow, but certainly something in the next few years. I think we can look at two things. One is how to produce. So irrigation is going to be absolutely key. A lot of UK agriculture is rain-fed, but there is irrigation and infrastructure out there, such as drip irrigation, which can deliver water very precisely, and it's used in semi-arid areas where water is very scarce. So I think that is one thing we're going to have to do. I do think even in the next couple of years, creating cooler microclimates on agricultural land.
So instead of having a hot house, you have a cool house. Perhaps.
You have a cool house by planting trees, the right sort of trees that don't, take up too much water, but they can actually lower the temperature and increase the water use efficiency. I think also something in the next couple of years, but definitely for the long term, is what we consume. When you look at the average household in the UK, 90% of the water that we consume, so me as an individual, 90% of that is through what I eat rather than what I use for a bath or washing up or from industry. So actually, as individuals, we have a large capacity to affect what is being produced.
But we're told
and
to
what we
drink as much
consume.
as we can in hot weather.
Drinking is fine. It's more about what you eat. So if you have a very heavy meat-based diet, you're going to be using about 5,000 litres of water per person.
Oh, so you're suggesting it's not what we consume ourselves, it's,
No.
it's the means of delivery to us that uses all of
Yes,
that water.
it's the food consumption. It's the food consumption. So 5,000 litres if you have a very heavy meat-based diet versus 2,000 litres for a plant-based diet. I mean, I don't think anyone's advocating the whole world goes vegetarian or vegan. There are strong reasons for having animal-based protein in some situations. But eating less meat and having more of a circular economy would not only reduce the water footprint, how much water we need to use, because it's not only what the animals drink, it's actually how much grain they consume and the water that grain needs to be produced.
But no answers for him or for anybody else. No magic bullet, if you like, for the next couple of weeks to how to get by until the rains come again.
Unfortunately, not. I mean, no, I don't have any.
Well, we're going to take a look,
answers.
Corrado, at a map of Europe that just shows you how hot it is. There's the areas people should be watching, and there's the areas there where they should be on the alert, and those alert areas are getting more and more frequent. Interesting to me that in the southern part of Europe, and on the east coast of Spain and east coast of Italy, southern Greece, it isn't as bad as it is in the north. So is it the fact that in the north we normally expect more rainfall and therefore we're not used to coping without it, whereas in the south people have found a way to live with this?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm not, an expert on climate change itself, but there is definitely the argument that, one element of climate change is that is going to, turn a bit upside down whatever we need to know, whatever we normally know about temperature and the weather. So it is true that southern European countries are more used to hot weather, but I don't think that necessarily might be an argument for those countries coping better. I mean, in Italy, the Po is actually also at historical low levels, and this is creating
Well, I think we've got
huge
pictures
problems.
of the Po. I think we've got pictures of it over a number of weeks or months, and you can see it's actually shrinking. It's like a snake that's died in the desert that is actually sort of getting smaller and smaller and smaller. What effect is that having?
Well, this is having a huge impact on the local economy, the regional economy, and on tourism itself. It's very early days and very difficult to quantify. But I think, as we mentioned before, the fact that there is already a very difficult situation economically for many of those economies because of high energy prices, electricity, and more generally, a disruption of trade and supply chains as a result of both the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. This can only come as an additional cost, and that would be very large.
It's not just the Po that Corrado's mentioned there, and we've talked about the Rhine. Samantha, the Danube's been mentioned. It's pretty much all of Europe's rivers. Am I right?
Yes, that's right.
And therefore, without them, we have to move goods by road, but you know the disadvantages of doing that, or we have to put them in an aeroplane and send them somewhere. How can you get around something like this and still maintain, if not a semblance of normality, then some modicum of reality?
So I think there's a number of different strategies that can be applied to ensure our society is resilient to future changes that both the other panelists have described. So we know that in Europe, extreme events will become more frequent and more intense. And this means that, these extreme events will include heat waves, they'll include marine heat waves, they'll include droughts. And because they're projected to increase, we can ensure that societal infrastructure is resilient to those. So as Anna described, increasing the ability of agriculture to cope with the new climate normal that we face now, by cooling down the agriculture, by using drip irrigation, by using these mechanisms that enable us to adapt to the climate that we will be facing now and in the future, rather than the climate that our infrastructure was built around, that we experienced 50 years or so, that we're no longer experiencing now. So
Carry on, sorry.
Just to give your viewers an understanding, the world globally has warmed up 1.2 degrees above the pre-industrial average. And the pre-industrial average is kind of the temperatures that our grandparents and great-grandparents faced 100 to 150 years ago. So the climate that they experienced when they were children, when they were growing up, we no longer experience because the world is so much warmer. Europe is warming up even faster than that, at about 2 times the global rate. And then the Arctic, so the polar region to the north of the planet, is warming up even faster again, at 3 to 4 times faster than the global average.
Okay, which causes so many different problems. And I'm going to introduce you yet again, you're going to be preceded by another British farmer. This is Andrew Ward. He grows principally vegetables.
The dry weather and extreme heat has affected most crops, but particularly badly affected are root crops such as potatoes and sugar beet. I haven't got any potatoes here in Lincolnshire, but I do grow sugar beet, and at the moment my crop is about half the size it should be due to the extreme dry weather. The factory at Newark opens around the 20th of September, but I can't see that's happening because the ground is so hard and dry at the moment, we can't get the crop out the ground unless we have significant rainfall. So just to show you how hard the ground is, you can see the big cracks in the ground here. When you look, it's just so dry, and it's just like absolute dust bowl here, and like concrete. You can just see there's no moisture in that whatsoever. And all the cracks here, all up this field, you can just see how dry it is.
So he has obviously today problems, and he might well be the sort of farmer, Andrew Ward, who's looking to the future as well. My question in relation to what we've just heard there is, how localised can your production be? In other words, you remove the problem of transporting it around the country or indeed around Europe, but only if you grow locally what you need. And yet we're told that we have to keep supplying countries that have longer drought problems in Africa and elsewhere with food from different parts of the world. You can't square that circle, can you? You've got to keep moving food. And at the same time, you're going to need it where you are.
You do have to keep on moving food, and actually the transport in terms of energy emissions is a much smaller part of the whole equation than the actual production. It's production.
Doesn't really matter?
It's not that it doesn't matter. I do feel with every, with the urgency of, trying to keep within the 1.5 degree warming. And Samantha was talking about we've already hit 1.2.
But it's infinitesimal, is it, compared to what cows produce and consume?
It is.
Cows and other animals.
Yeah, it is smaller. Yeah, much less significant than what animals consume and the emissions that they produce through methane. And it's also smaller than the emissions that are created from cutting down forests to be able to clear it for agriculture. So that what we call land use change also has to be kept, we have to keep a very close eye on that. I don't think we can, you can't actually produce everything you need locally, and sometimes it will, your greenhouse gas emissions from producing it locally will be much greater than if you produced it elsewhere in the world and transported it.
So I should say, I'm not going to buy that avocado because it's come in from Mexico, or those bananas because they've come in from the Caribbean, simply because the way that they're produced agriculturally is probably dangerous, not because it's taken an aeroplane to fly them over to me.
I would hesitate to say that an avocado produced overseas is produced in an unsustainable way. I would really recommend, suggest very strongly that people look at where their produce is coming from and actually look at how it is produced, because they're very different.
Do you really think people have got the time and the energy and the application to do something like that? Or do we just get on with daily life because we've got too many other problems?
I think behaviour is really hard to change, really hard, and I think that's our biggest stumbling block. I think that there are lots of things that we can do through labelling and providing information and nudging and changing prices, relative prices. If you
make the avocado, let's use that as a filament of this piece, cost me £5 instead of 75 pence.
Yeah.
Well, then I just won't buy it.
then you probably just won't buy it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because
It is
actually
for the avocado producers somewhere.
depends on that avocado producer. I would say that there are some farmers in other countries which could maybe be producing other goods, other foodstuffs, which use land and water much more efficiently than, for example, an avocado. Again, I don't want to make avocados a villain.
I like it.
Yeah.
Let's get away from the moral side of the argument, if you like, which of course has by extension implications for our climate. And I want to ask you this, the premise of the programme, Samantha, I'll come to you first of all probably, is the fact that our rivers are running dry and probably doing so more frequently than they ever have done before. How do you stop that happening other than climate change? Do you say to the water companies, stop losing 600 million litres of water every 2 months or something in the UK and in other countries? Do you just tell people to become more efficient with it?
Efficiency is certainly one element of the equation. So when we're talking about drought conditions, there's actually 4 different types of drought. So droughts are caused by a meteorological drought, which is a lack of rainfall. But then the implications of that lack of rainfall really is what we're discussing here, how it impacts society. So there is the hydrological drought, which is the lack of water in rivers and streams and lakes. And again, that's what we've discussed today. Then there's the agricultural drought, which is the lack of water and soil, which then impacts crops and livestock. And then there's the ecological drought as well, when all of these different combinations of droughts impact our national parks and wildlife that we really need to protect as well. The other element of drought conditions is that wildfires are then much more frequent and more intense. So we've seen over the last few weeks in Europe, and there was a report in the UK today that the UK has had something like 4 times more fires this summer than it had last year. So we know with climate change, as the world gets warmer and drier, there are a lot of consequences for this. So we really need to look across the supply chain, as Anna described, of what choices can we make to improve efficiencies in how we use water and how we retain water where we need it as well, so that not only the rivers flow for transport, but there are towns all across Europe that have run out of drinking water. And that is an incredibly significant problem for the communities that live there.
Corrado, we're coming towards the end of the programme. I'm going to ask you to be not the voice of doom, but somebody who's going to tell us exactly where we're likely to be, unless it buckets down with rain in the next 6 weeks or so. Can Europe afford to go more than 2 months with weather like this before it becomes economically so damaging that it's irreparable?
Probably not. I think we have to consider that already, as I was saying at the beginning, the region is already on the brink of a recession. Clearly, the war in Ukraine, which represents a major event just at the in the European neighborhood, of course, will have a very strong implication in the third quarter of this year, particularly when Europe's energy demand will increase as we enter the winter season. So I think Europe definitely doesn't have any spare capacity to sustain itself with a drought going 2 months long. So certainly, solutions need to be found, but long-term solutions, as Anna was saying, will take a while. And even if we use economic incentives, that will take a while.
Indeed they will, which is why I'm going to finish this programme by asking each one of you in the space of 15 seconds to tell me one way that you are cutting back on your water usage to make yourself not only a more useful citizen, but to make Europe less of a dry place. Corrado, you first of all.
Well, I normally follow a vegetarian-vegan diet as far as myself is concerned.
Okay, you normally do that, so how can you improve on that? What are you doing right now to save?
Well, I guess, probably take shorter showers, be mindful of the water that I use, and just, also, as we said, look at sort of supply chain of goods that I consume. We talked about avocado before, so probably eat less avocado on toast.
Well, and then you'd have to spend hours in the supermarket looking at Google to find out where it came from. So Anthony, got a thought on that? What are you doing that's different?
So I'm also a vegetarian and look at my footprint as well. So I think the reality is that our choices matter. Everyone listening to the show should understand that the individual choices that they make are really important for our future. So even if 10 people who watch this show change one of the actions that they take to save a little bit more water, to have a smaller footprint, it's incredibly important.
It'd be wonderful if I could see my footprints when I take my dogs for a walk, but I don't think that's going to happen in the fields around me for some weeks, months maybe yet. Go on, a quick one from you.
Using grey water and using that as much as possible.
You
rather
mean water that's already been used once?
Exactly. Using that for any anything that I need in the garden, including my vegetables. And looking at using less water-intensive vegetables with the aid of supermarket labelling, please.
Come on, quickly. Less water-intensive vegetables, such as?
Yes. So probably not avocados. It's going to be
Radishes?
radishes. It may be radishes. It's going to be beans. But I'm more of an agricultural economist and an agronomist.
So a diet of radishes, beans, and eternal sunshine. That doesn't really sound like heaven to me. Thank you very much for coming on the programme, offering some thoughts and perhaps some solutions. Thank you for coming in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this edition of Roundtable. Eat well. I hope you sleep well. I hope it rains soon. Bye-bye.